Chapter 6 is about the role of the state. Chapter 6 consists of 6 sections. The state has 5 economic roles. This slideshow will explain each of these roles from different theoretical perspectives. Socioeconomic theory of the state, first and foremost, regards the state as responsible for providing equal opportunities for everybody in a market, as well as responsible for redistribution. The extent to which income distribution is equal or unequal can be measured by the Gini coefficient. That ranges between 0 and 1. 0 means equal income distribution. 1 means very unequal income distribution because one person gets all the income. This table shows data for the Gini coefficient in Latin America between 2000 and 2010. The Gini coefficient here is written as a percentage, so it ranges from 0 to 100%. What is interesting to note is that the Gini coefficient has declined over the years in most Latin American countries, meaning that income inequality in Latin America has reduced. Look at the first country mentioned, for example, Argentina. The Gini coefficient in the year 2000 was 51, but in the year 2010 it had declined to 44. Social economics of the state is more than only concerned with equity and income inequality. It's also concerned with the provision of public goods, regulation, in particular price regulation, and it's concerned with the case when governments are not benign, when something goes wrong in the economic role of the government. For example, when the government doesn't manage to raise sufficient taxes. Finally, social economics looks beyond the state, at the community economy to balance both the market and the state. In institutional economics, the state is regarded as the foundation for the market through formal institutions, in particular property rights, but also regulation. And finally, just like social economics, institutional economics recognizes the danger of government failure. In this case, this is particularly looked upon as government capture, that the government is captured by big interests of industry, large firms having strong lobbies influencing the type of regulation and the type of property right distribution that is in their interest. The most important role of the state in post-Keynesian economics is that the state can provide a solution to disadvantages of economic cycles. Remember, in particular, to crisis. For this reason, the state can organize its budget in such a way that it is anti-cyclical, reducing the dynamics of the economic cycle. How can the state exactly perform this role in post-Keynesian economics? Well, it has some tools. One is the multiplier. It's an accelerator on aggregate demand through initial injections in the economy, for example, through government spending. Another tool is the developmental state, a strong state that provides support for innovation, subsidies to some sectors of the economy that are key, and also a risk buffer for important firms and sectors in the economy. This leads to the paradox of the strong state in post-Keynesian economics. The paradox is that a strong state is not so much needed to balance a weak market, but to enable a strong market, a market that is effective for everybody. In neoclassical economics, the role of the state is minimal. It is limited to the enforcement of property rights, preventing the accumulation of market power, and it is concerned with even the creation of new markets that help to solve existing problems in terms of externalities, for example. In other words, in neoclassical economics, the role of the state is largely to enable markets, to make them work freer, with as limited regulation as possible. The state can only perform its economic role when it has money available. This topic is referred to as public finance, and the key policy is fiscal policy. So this concerns budgets. Government budgets, on the one hand, imply revenues, and on the other hand, government expenditures. The revenues, we use the sign T for taxes and for spending G for government spending. Then the public debt is the accumulated budget deficits over time minus the surpluses over time. Try to figure out the example on this slide. There are three main categories for government expenditures. First is government consumption and government investment, for example, paying teacher salaries and building schools. Second, transfer payment, for example, for social policy like conditional cash transfers. And finally, all governments have debt, so they have to pay back the debt, and they have to do this with interest. There are four sources for tax revenue. First, the biggest one, income income is taxed, earned by individuals, but also profit taxes, the profit earned by firms. Second is the value-added tax or sales tax. That is the tax we pay when we buy something. It's tax on consumption. Third, import taxes. These tend to be quite low because of international trade agreements, in which countries agree that they lower import taxes for each other's goods. A final source of tax revenue by the state is fees. States ask fees for services that they provide, for example, school services or healthcare services. This slide shows you the tax structure of Brazil. That's the bottom pie. The first pie is for Latin America, and the second one on the top is for the OECD countries, say the rich countries. Now, when we compare this, we see that the blue slice of the pie is for taxes on income and profit. This is relatively low in Brazil as compared to Latin America and the OECD. But it has relatively high social security contributions, and that is the gray slice of the pie, much bigger than in the rest of Latin America. And now the black part, that is really big for Brazil, meaning that tax revenue in Brazil relies a lot on value-added taxes, consumer taxes. The final slide is about bonds and public debt. Bonds are the way governments finance deficits. So when the tax revenue is not big enough to cover all the government expenditures. Who buys then the bonds? Well, that's individuals, big investment funds, and banks. And what happens when the government debt becomes very big? Well, that's a problem. And there are different ways to solve it. The best way for a country is when the total debt is partly waived, so creditors are not fully paid back. But sometimes governments are forced to pay back, and the only way they can do that is by reducing expenditures. Often this concerns social expenditures at cost of the poorer parts of the population.